It's 5 p.m. right here in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to the World Today. I'm Anne Nwawado. Here's what's coming up on the program. China retaliates, placing counter tariffs on the United States imports after President Donald Trump placed 10% levies on Chinese goods. US, Mexico and Canada agree to delay trade tariffs for 1 month. Plus, NATO alliance calls for increased defense spending in the bloc. Once again, welcome to the program. China has announced retaliatory measures on some American goods as U.S. tariffs on all Chinese goods come into force. The Chinese tariffs, which are set to begin on Monday, February the 10th, include 15% import tax on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, as well as 10% on crude oil, agricultural machinery, and other vehicles. President Trump's 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports to the U.S. came into force at midnight today, while its proposed 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods have been postponed following last-minute negotiations. In the meantime, China's ambassador Fu Kong has expressed opposition to increased tariffs by the United States, rejecting accusations related to fentanyl trade and, of course, the Panama Canal and artificial intelligence. But Fu Kong says that China and the U.S., as the two biggest countries, do not need to fight each other. Instead, they need to work together. Speaking to journalists in New York at the start of China's presidency of the Security Council, Mr. Fu adds that this is in violation of the WTO rules.
We are firmly opposed to this unwarranted increase, and we do believe that this is in violation of the WTO rules. So that's why China is filing a complaint at the WTO, and also where we may be forced to take countermeasures. And let me also emphasize that there is no winner in a trade war. And we do hope that the U.S. should look at its own problems, really find a solution that is beneficial not only to itself and also to the whole world. And frankly speaking, I don't think that raising tariffs is beneficial to the U.S. itself. And China is one of the countries that has the most stringent regulations on fentanyl. Actually, we have regulations on all fentanyl-related substance. Actually, China is the only country that put the whole category of fentanyl-related substance under regulation. I think the accusation against China is totally false, is groundless. And let me emphasize that China has not participated in the management and operation of Panama Canal and has never interfered in canal affairs. China respects Panama's sovereignty over the canal and recognizes the canal as permanent neutral international gateway. China and the U.S. are the two biggest financial contributors to the UN, so it is only natural that our two countries have some similar concerns on how to enhance the efficiency of the Secretariat and the UN's work. So there are many things that China and the U.S. can work together. And I do hope that despite all the rhetorics that we have heard from the American politicians, we can take a constructive, and I will emphasize, a professional approach to our work. Our mission here is to build bridges between our two countries, and then if there is a possibility, our two countries can work together to improve the life of the people of the whole world and to improve the situation. As I said, the world is entering a very turbulent period. So as two biggest countries, we don't need to fight each other. We need to work together.
U.S. President Donald Trump has suspended his threat to steep tariffs on Mexico and Canada, agreeing to a 30-day pause in return for concessions on border and crime enforcement with the two neighboring countries. Both Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mexican President Claudia said that they had agreed to bolster border enforcement efforts in response to Mr. Trump's demand to crack down on immigration and drug smuggling. That could pause 25% tariffs due to take effect on Tuesday for 30 days. Let's hear more from the president, who was speaking with journalists at the Oval Office on Monday.
We have tremendous potential in this country, tremendous. You're seeing that, what's happened just in a short period of time. And as an example, TikTok, we're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok, and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it, otherwise we won't. But I have the right to do that, and we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund, whatever we make, or if we do a partnership with very wealthy people, a lot of options, but we could put that as an example in the fund, and we have a lot of other things that we could put in the fund. And I think in a short period of time, we'd have one of the biggest funds, and you know, some of them are pretty large, I must tell you. Some of the, like the Saudi Arabia fund is on the large side, but eventually we'll catch it. But we're going to create a lot of wealth for the fund. And I think it's about time that this country had a sovereign wealth fund. And these two gentlemen and some others are going to work with them very closely, and they'll be heading it up, and they're going to do a great job. Two highly respected people that have done unbelievably well in the world, in the real world. I had a great talk with Mexico, and we had President Sheinbaum is a woman. I like her very much. We've had good relationships, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not, and we have to stop the illegal aliens from coming in. I think we've lost 200,000 people on average a year for many years. I also spoke with Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and we had a good talk in the morning, but I did ask him a couple of questions, like, you know, banks aren't allowed to do business in Canada. Canada is very tough. Canada is very, you know, we're not treated well by Canada, and we have to be treated well. Banks are not, as an example, allowed. Did you know that banks, American banks, are not allowed to do business in Canada? Can you believe that? And that's one of many things. Now, we had another big thing, speaking of China. China's involved with the Panama Canal. They won't be for long, and that's the way it has to be. Marco just got back, as you know. He's in the process of coming back. I guess he's almost back by now. And just like I got $420 billion, and now it's actually over $600 billion, the Secretary General of NATO came in 2 weeks ago, and he said it was a miracle when Trump came in, when President Trump came into NATO. He said it was $636 billion by saying to them, no, you have to pay. And if you don't pay, we're not going to be there for you. You know, somebody has to say it, and they paid. In Ukraine, they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist. We're giving them equipment. European is not keeping up with us. They should equalize. And look, we have an ocean in between. They don't. It's more important for them than it is for us. But they're way below us in terms of money. And they should be paying at least equal. They should really be paying much more than us, but let's say equal to us. And they're billions and billions of dollars below. So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things.
Mexican President Claudia has confirmed that the tariffs with the United States are on hold for a month, and that's after conversations with President Donald Trump, where she committed to putting more law enforcement on the U.S. border to stop the flow of drugs. Mr. Trump ordered the 25% tariffs on all Mexican goods over the weekend, with Mexico saying that it would respond with its own tariffs if its own, without detailing on what products exactly. As part of that agreement, President Claudia said that Mexico will will send 10,000 National Guard troops to the U.S. border to stop drugs, especially fentanyl, from moving into the United States. The United States, in turn, has promised to work to stop the flow of high-powered weapons into Mexico from the United States. The Mexican peso, which had been trading down over 1% against the U.S. dollars, reversed course after the announcement and traded in positive territory. And joining us now is Johanna LeBlanc, National Security Law and Foreign Relations expert, for more on this. Thank you very much for joining us, Johanna.
Thank you for having me.
And now, what are the primary motivations behind the U.S. trade war with various countries?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is Mr. Trump utilizing trade as a negotiation tool, right? Under normal circumstances, it is always used as a way to balance trade deficits, right? But we see Trump is using it for a different purpose. In some cases, it has worked. In the case of China, we don't know what to expect, right? But what I can tell you is that these tariffs that are being imposed on these various countries, and obviously Canada and Mexico, their tariffs is actually being put on hold for now. But if those tariffs were to proceed, we're talking about the cost of consumer goods on products like beer and produce actually going up. And I think that is a mistake for the Trump administration, because, as you know, he ran a campaign on Biden's economy that was dealt with a great deal of inflation. He wanted to decrease inflation, and he wanted to ensure that the American people are able to afford groceries. But by imposing these tariffs, the cost has to be passed on to somebody, and the private sector will have no choice but to pass those costs on to the American consumer.
Now, how have U.S. trade policies affected global supply chains and international trade relations so far?
Well, obviously, in the context of Canada, Mexico, and China, those three countries are the United States' three largest trading partners. And as Justin Trudeau announced, he said he cannot believe his ally, his friend, is doing this to him, right? So I think that if the United States can proceed to impose tariffs on some of its strongest allies, some of its strongest trade partners, where does that leave countries across the African continent? And what does that mean for the future of the African continental free trade area? So it is very concerning. And I do anticipate that if those tariffs stay, we're going to see an increase in price for various goods here in this country.
But Joanna, let's look at the potential long-term consequences of U.S. trade war on the global economy. I know that analysts have come out to say, oh, it's not going to be good or whatever, but what are the actual consequences?
I think one of the consequences is that the market now becomes unpredictable, right? Because as an investor, when you are trying to decipher where you should invest your money or where you should open a business, you look to see, is there stability in that country? And in our case, because Mr. Trump is utilizing tariff as a negotiation tool, businesses may be concerned about doing business in America because if Trump finds himself disagreeing with one's policy, tariffs could be imposed. I mean, look at South Africa, for example. Mr. President Ramaphosa signed the expropriation bill, which is a bill that deals with land. Mr. Trump announced that his team is going to take a look at the bill and to look at how white South African landowners are being treated, and that he will suspend foreign assistance to South Africa. So I think when you have a government that deals in that manner, I think it creates a certain level of unpredictability. But to be frank with you, what Mr. Trump is doing is no different from what other governments have done. The only difference is that those conversations usually happen behind closed doors. And usually there's typically a negotiation that happens before the public is even aware of such conversation having taken place.
Other countries, I mean, China, for example, is retaliating already against U.S. trade policies. I know that Canada and Mexico have been suspended for now, but what impact has this had on U.S. exports?
Well, obviously, it's going to take a few days for it to be implemented. So we don't know the actual impact as of now. But I think some of the things that I talked about earlier about the increase in price of goods will definitely happen. But I think that in the case of China, unlike Mexico and Canada, China has a very strong GDP, and I think that China is not going to back down so easily. China is going to fight the United States on this matter. We saw that China has already filed a complaint against the United States for imposing this tariff. So I think that it's going to add further strain on the relationship between China and the United States, which we know already exists. And we know also the United States is very concerned about China's influence around the world, because China has indeed expanded its footprints across the Latin America, the Western Hemisphere, and certainly the African continent. And one of the reasons why one of the reasons why the Western Hemisphere is one of the priorities for this administration is under the Monroe Doctrine, the Western Hemisphere belongs to the United States. Two, the United States wants to flex its muscles to see that China has less influence in the Caribbean as well as Latin America. As you know, those parts of the world are considered to be the United States' third borders.
And now, how has the trade war affected U.S. relationships with allies and even adversaries so far?
I think that in the case of adversaries, what you're going to see is that it's going to create a vacuum, right? A power vacuum. And countries are going to start looking for alternatives in terms of building alliances and strengthen partnerships. So I don't think these tariffs actually serve in the actual best interest of the United States government. I think in a way, it also weakens the United States' global posture around the world, because if you want to maintain your position as a superpower, you want to ensure that you strengthen relations with countries around the world, and that countries can actually rely on you as a partner. But as these tariffs are being imposed, countries that have not been imposed, tariff have not been imposed on them, we'll have to start considering what other alternatives do I have. So I think it opens the door for countries like China and Russia to continue to expand their footprints all around the world, and certainly across the African continent.
But Joanna, what are the potential scenarios for resolving this trade war? I know you've heard leaders there say that there are no winners in trade wars. What are the implications of each? Maybe if they decide to resolve this, how will they go about it?
I agree. There are no winners in these trade wars. The people who actually impacted are the consumers, whether it be in America, in Canada, in China, in Mexico, or wherever the case may be. And we know that these tariffs often have a ripple effect while it is imposed on these countries. But you could see that these tariffs impact other countries around the world that rely on some of these products. So I think the impacts are very significant. But Mr. Trump is obviously using tariffs as a way to negotiate with countries, because as you know, he has a America First policy. There are certain things that he wants for the American people. He feels as though the American people in America have been taken advantage of by some of its trade partners. So there are some who are certainly agree with Mr. Trump's way of negotiating with these countries to get some of the things that the U.S. needs. For example, the Mexican president announced that she will provide 10,000 soldiers at the U.S.-Mexico border. And we know the U.S.-Mexico border is one of the major points of entry for asylum seekers who are trying to seek asylum into the United States, and even those who are what you call economic migrants looking to enter into the United States. So I think it's a positive impact, but nonetheless, I think it creates a great deal of uncertainty for countries around the world, and certainly the consumers are really, really impacted and are gravely concerned if those tariffs are actually imposed and executed.
And what steps can the United States take now to rebuild trust and cooperation with its trade partners?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is Mr. Trump's style of negotiation. Mr. Trump, he's a businessman, and he is running America like a private corporation. But I think in the case of international relations, I think that the diplomatic route is the best route versus imposing these tariffs and announcing them publicly for the whole world to know about them. So I think that in some regards, Mr. Trump's tactics work, but in some regards, it further weakens America's global standing around the world. So I do think that also there's a role that Congress needs to play. Congress actually serves as the checks and balance for the executive branch. So we'd like to see Congress be a bit more aggressive in its stance in checking the executive branch so that we don't ultimately impact the United States' relationship with these countries, but most importantly, the United States' global standing as a superpower in the world.
Thank you very much, Joanna LeBlanc, national security, law and foreign relations expert. Thanks a lot for your contribution on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.
And to other stories now. Staff at the U.S. Agency for International Development were instructed to stay out of their Washington headquarters this week amid billionaire Elon Musk's announcement to shut down the agency. The move is coming as part of the broader push by Mr. Trump's administration to overhaul government efficiency and cut costs of over 600 employees who were reported being locked out of their computer systems overnight. Amid the upheaval, the protester outside the USAID headquarters expressed her frustration and fear over the agency's potential dissolution. Mr. Musk, a co-chair of the Department of Government Efficiency, declared during a live session on X that USAID is beyond repair and must be shut down. The Trump administration has accused USAID of being unresponsive to policy directives, describing it as being run by a bunch of radical lunatics. President Donald Trump stated, in his words, "We're getting them out, and then we'll make a decision."
We were not expecting the entire agency to get destroyed, and I'm glad it's finally getting news coverage. We were under attack January 21st, and there really wasn't much coverage on it, and I'm glad that it's culminating in this moment, and I hope that people see it as like a fire-starting moment, that nobody is safe under this administration.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio continues his five-nation tour in Central America, arriving in San Salvador on Monday to meet with President Nayib Bukele on immigration policy, including deportation cooperation. San Salvador is a second stop on his five-nation Central American tour of Panama, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. The trip is aimed at getting Latin American countries to step up efforts to reduce migration on the U.S. southern border. During his visit to Panama on Monday, Rubio discussed migration, regional security, and the Panama Canal before watching a U.S.-funded deportation flight with 43 immigrants leave for Colombia. The trip is coming after U.S. President Donald Trump signed more than a dozen executive actions to address illegal mass migration in the country during his first week in office. El Salvador has offered to take in criminals deported from the United States, including those with U.S. citizenship, and house them in its mega jail. The deal was announced after U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele during his visit to the Central American nation. Mr. Bukele, whose iron fist approach to gangs has won him plaudits from voters, but been heavily criticized by human rights groups, says that he had offered the U.S. the opportunity to outsource part of its policing system. Mr. Rubio says the U.S. was profoundly grateful to Bukele, adding that no country has ever made an offer of friendship such as this one. Referring to two of the region's most notorious transnational crime gangs, Rubio added that El Salvador would also take in deported migrants and criminals from any nationality, be the MS-13 or the Tren de Aragua. While still on the program, let's now invite Maria Bird, our Washington correspondent, who joins us now for more. Hello, Maria, via phone, actually. I'm sure you can hear me. Now, how are Americans reacting to this delay in increased tariff for Mexico and Canada? We hear it's been postponed for another 30 days.
Yeah, so Americans, are not surprised about the postponement. They know that Mexico is a major player in our economic trade pieces. They also know that Canada is a big part as well, as we are now in the position of, having two of our bordering countries right there that we easily trade back and forth from. So it's not a surprise that this tariff has been put off for another 30 days.
What more can you tell us about the Monday meeting between the three leaders?
Well, this meeting really focused in on some of what I think President Trump has been asking for. President Trump has clearly been very clear that he is going to put America first, and that he is planning to ensure that the economic plight of America definitely improves. And so I think that, as we're looking now at these meetings and really what he's looking to do, I think that it's only going to be clear that only is he going to be moving forward as it relates to the trade deals, but also, as we know, he has met with Netanyahu to discuss consequential moments for both leaders in the Middle East. And so he's taking care of quite a few very clear points as it relates to what he is expecting for how the U.S. should move forward, and also the world. He has very clear opinions on the U.S. involvement in the Middle East. He has very clear opinions on ceasefire between, obviously, Hamas and Israel. And so we've seen the president take on quite a few major issues over the last few weeks.
Now, a U.S. Secretary of State is still on the tour of the Central American countries. How is the trip going?
Well, this trip in Central America is one that I think many expected. We know that there is quite a bit of illegal immigration between the U.S. and Central America. And so being able to kind of address this, I think we have not seen someone from the U.S. go to visit Central America to kind of put their stamp on what the U.S. is expecting. We know that the Secretary of State is giving remarks. We know the Secretary of State's Latin America visit was one that has definitely been planned. And so he's expected to kind of obviously show a sense of commitment. But I think most importantly, as we know that these tariffs and a whole host of things are coming down the pike, and knowing the number of immigrants from El Salvador, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, his tensions meant to drive forward the Trump agenda, paying closer attention to those neighboring states and countries, but most importantly, being able to be very clear on the priority of the U.S. And also dealing with the illegal immigration challenges that exist.
Now, Maria, if El Salvador is actually offering to lock up U.S. criminals, how is that expected to turn out? And does it mean that Guantanamo Bay plan is out of it?
No, I think that is a direct response to what President Trump has stated. President Trump has obviously put forth the ICE investigations and really been very clear that he is going to arrest and deport any illegal alien that has committed a crime in the United States. And so El Salvador stating that Americans that are committing crimes is a direct response. I think that Americans can expect that. The question is, what is that really going to mean? How many Americans could potentially be arrested? and will they be deported? And so I think that depending on what actually comes out of that will depend on the American response.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria Bird, our Washington DC correspondent. Thanks a lot for your time and your contribution on the World Today. The European Union will take firm action to counter potential trade tariffs from the United States following Mr. Trump's aggressive trade measures targeting Canada, Mexico and China. Well, this according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who says that the EU is prepared for a robust but constructive dialogue with the United States. Her remarks are coming after US President Donald Trump announced plans to impose tariffs on EU member states, accusing them of being out of line.
On defense capabilities that should be developed as a matter of priority. We agree to concentrate on the most critical gaps identified by member states through the work of the European Defence Agency in full coherence with NATO, to focus on the most pressing needs among them and to concentrate on areas where there is a clear European Union added value. In the discussion today, there was a clear focus on air and missile defense, for example, but also, to mention just a few, missiles and ammunition, military mobility and strategic enablers. There was another very clear message today: strengthening the European defence industry as to be at the centre of this effort. We must produce more of the capabilities we need and do it faster.
The European Union is prepared for a robust but constructive dialogue with the United States. But we also recognise potential challenges in the relationship with the United States, and we are ready for that. When targeted, unfairly or arbitrarily, the European Union will respond firmly. This weekend we witnessed how steep tariffs were imposed on Canada and Mexico. Those tariffs raise business costs, they harm workers and consumers, they create unnecessary economic disruption and drive inflation. We do not see much good coming out of this. And of course we are fully aware of the fact that we have our own challenges that we have to master. We have to do our homework. So it was very clear today also that we would focus on the competitiveness of the European Union.
In the meantime, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has called for increased defence spending by member states. Mr. Rutte made the call at the joint press conference with UK Prime Minister in Brussels. He adds that member states need to step up our game, in his words, and better equipped to meet any threats amid increasing Russian destabilisation campaigns in allied countries. UK Prime Minister, on his part, confirmed that the UK is committed to NATO and it's stronger than ever.
Our world is increasingly more dangerous. We must be better equipped to meet any threat across all domains, both now and in the future. Russian destabilization campaigns in allied countries are on the rise. They have targeted digital infrastructure, British officials and even your National Health Service. Just last month, once again, you detected a Russian spy ship in British waters. And you made it clear to Moscow that such brazen acts were simply unacceptable. To stop these attacks once and for all, we need to up our game and make sure our deterrence leaves no room for doubt. You have long met the 2% target, and I welcome plans to further increase investments in defence. Because in a more dangerous world, 2% will not be enough to keep us safe. We need to invest considerably more. I'm absolutely convinced we can deal with these issues, and there are always issues between allies. It is never always tranquil and happy going. There are always issues, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. But I'm absolutely convinced that will not get in the way of our collective determination to keep our deterrence strong.
As you know, the UK's commitment to NATO is stronger than ever because the need for NATO is stronger than ever. And we've had a very good and productive discussion today on how we can meet the rising threats that Russia poses across our continent, including the situation, of course, in Ukraine. And I think what's really important is open and strong trading relations, and that's been the basis of my discussions with President Trump. And I know that intense US-EU discussions are planned. In relation to the issue that you link it to of Ukraine, I do think it's right for us to acknowledge the role that the US have played in relation to the joint effort on Ukraine, and that's, of course, pivotal. Relationship between the UK and the US and the EU, I've always been clear that both are important to us. Now, that, for me, isn't new. I think that's always been the case and will be the case for many, many years to come. That's why in my discussions with President Trump, we've touched on issues of trade and on issues of security, both really important in relation to the trade that we already do between our two countries, but also the security, the defence and the intelligence partnership that we've founded over many, many years, hugely important to our collective defence.
A second woman has been confirmed dead in the flooding which has inflicted credible devastation on communities in northern Australia. Police say the 82-year-old woman's body was found in a cane paddock in Queensland on Tuesday, 2 days after a 63-year-old woman died when a boat she was in overturned during a rescue attempt. The region has been inundated since Saturday, with parts of northern Queensland seeing nearly 2 meters, and that's about 6.5 feet of rain. On Tuesday, conditions were starting to ease, although Queensland Premier David Crisafulli warns that it is still a disaster that's going to test the resolve of the people. He describes the devastation as incredible, but notes that weather conditions are better, allowing thousands to begin returning to their homes. 5 people have been shot at an education center in central Sweden. Police are saying that the shooting happened in Örebro, 200 kilometers west of the capital, Stockholm, on Tuesday afternoon. Police say the danger is not over, warning the public to stay away. The extent of the injuries is still unclear, but police say no officers have been shot. The shooting, which occurred just before 1 p.m., apparently targeted an adult education center which sits on a campus that is home to other schools. These centers are attended primarily by people who have not finished primary or secondary school. Students at nearby schools have been kept indoors for security purposes, while nearby hospitals are clearing their emergency rooms and intensive care units to free up space for patients. UNICEF and partners' fuel trucks are now lining up as they wait to be checked before entering northern Gaza. People are also waiting in their own cars with their belongings, hoping to enter as well as the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas remains in place. UNICEF spokesperson Tens Igram, on a mission to north of Gaza to deliver fuel and other supplies, says that fuel is the lifeblood of the humanitarian operations as it ensures all facilities to run. As families line up to move to the north, UNICEF has been handing out nutrition supplies, identity bracelets and leaflets about unexploded ordnance along the way that families are taking to go to the north.
Gaza City, and we've just brought these fuel trucks, 6 of them, up here in what was a 13-hour journey today. It was long because there's a lot of people on the roads, and these people are moving here to the north of Gaza where they're going to desperately need this fuel. Fuel is the lifeblood of the humanitarian operations. It makes sure that bakeries run, that hospitals run, that water pumps and fuel, so that they can continue to provide safe and clean water for people in Gaza City and beyond. This was an exceptional mission, though. This meant that the interagency convoy was allowed to come up this once with these 6 tanks, but we need this to happen more often to ensure that fuel flows freely into Gaza City.
Let's come back to Africa now, where South Africa's Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, Gwede Mantashe, has called on African nations to withhold their mineral resources from the United States if it cuts aid. He says that he said this during his keynote address at the African Mining in 2025 on Monday. Mr. Mantashe was referring to President Donald Trump's criticism of South Africa's new Exploration Act signed into law on January the 23rd, which he called land confiscation. The new legislation allows the government to expropriate private property for public purposes with defined compensation rules.
The African continent has significant reserves of industrial important minerals, such as manganese. We're a great manganese producer. You can talk to us. Copper. If you talk to us, you want too much copper, will lead you to DRC and Zambia. They will give you, that is where the concentration of copper is. If you want coal, we'll give you coal. And coal, king coal is back. There are many who wrote an obituary of coal prematurely. King coal is back. I can tell you. It's nickel, copper, titanium, vanadium, lithium, rare earth elements. All those minerals are found in this continent. Please, investors, pursue them. Those are the minerals of the future. Those are the minerals of the future. Notwithstanding, with the growing demand of these minerals, Africa needs to assert its advantage and take charge of the growing demand. You know, I was listening to, I have ministers in my cabinet who always worry about geopolitics. With this standing threat that, because you passed an Exploration Act, therefore Trump will withhold funding to South Africa. And I said, let's not immobilize Africa. Let's withhold minerals to US. That is it. If they don't give us money, let's not give them minerals. But the reality is they take our minerals, but say we're withdrawing funding. No, we have minerals in the continent. And therefore we have something that we have. We're not just beggars, but we must just use that endowment for our benefit as a continent. But if as a continent we are frightened, we fear everything, we are going to collapse, and will collapse with minerals at our doorstep.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the alliance of rebel groups in the eastern region known as the Congo River Alliance have declared a humanitarian ceasefire. In a statement, the group, which includes the M23 rebels, cited humanitarian concerns as the reason for the ceasefire. Before now, rebels had seized the city of Goma, and according to the UN, at least 900 people have been killed and 2,800 injured in recent fighting in and around the city. The G7 nations and the EU have condemned the offensive as a flagrant violation of DR Congo's sovereignty. Meanwhile, UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric has provided an update on the situation in Congo, expressing concern over rising health risks. He notes that while some economic activities are resuming, schools and banks are still closed, and food shortage still persists.
Humanitarian colleagues say they're concerned about escalating health risks with the rainy season intensifying. There are still bodies of people who died in the violence lying in the streets of Goma. Our colleagues tell us that morgues are at capacity and hospitals and health centers are overwhelmed with injured people. While efforts to chlorinate water are underway with the support of our humanitarian partners, the lack of drinking water is forcing people in Goma to rely on untreated water from Lake Kivu. Economic and other activities are gradually resuming, but schools and banks remain closed. 2 humanitarian organizations and government entities have had their vehicles hijacked over the weekend. Aid organizations continue to assess the impact of the looting of their warehouses as these groups try to resume the delivery of aid in and around Goma. Between Friday and Saturday, OCHA and its humanitarian partners jointly assessed displacement sites in and around Goma. Initial findings reveal that many camps have been looted, they've been destroyed and abandoned. While some people may have returned to their communities or sought refuge Elsewhere, many people still lack adequate shelter and access to basic services. The World Food Programme is telling us that they're actively pre-positioning supplies and ready to resume their operations as soon as conditions allow. The agency is also strengthening preparedness efforts in neighboring countries, working with UNHCR, with IOM and others to develop contingency plans. Given the risk of increased displacement as we've seen it, WFP is ensuring readiness in Rwanda, in Uganda, Burundi, and Tanzania. And as a reminder, 1 out of every 4 people across the DRC faces acute hunger, including children and pregnant and nursing women. Armed violence, continued conflict, and soaring food prices are obviously key drivers in the DRC's food insecurity.
Uganda's Ministry of Health, in collaboration with the World Health Organization and various partners, have launched the first ever vaccine trial for the Sudan strain of the Ebola virus. And this marks a significant milestone in emergency vaccine trials. Researchers from Makerere University and Uganda Virus Research Institute have worked diligently to prepare for this trial.
Have kicked off the vaccination for Ebola that broke out in the country last week. This exercise is involving one vaccine, which we have started with, and we are targeting people who are high risk. Those are people who have gotten in contact with the cases that we have confirmed in the country.
The World Health Organization is embedded in different aspects of fighting this outbreak, and we have been with the Ministry of Health that has been in the lead, in whom we have great confidence that they are able to have a robust response to this outbreak. It being the 8th, there is a lot of confidence in what can be done, but we also call upon partners that we need the support to the government of Uganda for the work that is being done here.
Thousands of locals and tourists are flocking to Beijing to visit the battling section of the Great Wall and China amid the New Year celebrations in China. Throngs of visitors visited one of the 7 wonders of the world, making the trek across China's most famous attraction. The Lunar Year celebration is usually one of the busiest times in the year in China, with millions of people traveling back with their families, and this year marks the beginning of the Year of the Snake. Olga Belka, a Russian-born artist, is making waves for her incredible works, which she paints from start to finish using the seafloor as her studio. Captured in the waters of Phuket, Belka paints in canvas in celebration of the Year of the Snake. Committed to preserving the ocean's beauty, Belka only uses specific types of environmentally friendly paints and canvases to ensure her artistic endeavors do not harm the ecosystem. When she is not engaged in underwater painting, Belka, based in Singapore, works as a diving instructor, teaching both children and adults. Belka has developed a unique technique for painting in salt water, allowing her to capture the intricate details of the underwater world. While she travels globally, painting in diverse locations, with each artwork requiring 2 to 6 dives, each lasting up to 3 hours.
My name is Olga Belka. I'm an underwater artist. This actually means I paint completely from start to finish underwater at the bottom of the sea. All my art process is certified as eco-friendly. Actually, it is very important to me because I care for marine life, and I really care to make it safe for all fish and corals and all environment. I'm based in Singapore, but I travel all over the world to create my art. For this upcoming Chinese New Year, I decided to create something really special. I dressed up in a snake costume to paint a festive artwork underwater. I spent 2 dives of 2 hours each at the seabed, And just imagine my excitement when during the second dive, a real sea snake came to pose for me. It was awesome. It was so great, and it turned out to be really snaky. All I had to do was dry the painting and add a nice inscription in Chinese. This Chinese phrase is a play on words. It sounds like a New Year's greeting, but if you translate it literally, it would be something like, I wish you plenty of fish, or something like this. It is very common for Chinese to congratulate each other like this. So I decided that these characters would be perfect to make my artwork truly festive. So happy Chinese New Year, everyone, and I wish you plenty of fish.
Well, very colorful painting there. And that's it on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.